The restaurant was buzzing with soft chatter and the clinking of cutlery. Waiters moved quickly between tables, carrying plates of food and glasses of sparkling water. The chandeliers cast a warm light over the polished floors, and the aroma of fine food filled the air. Among the busy staff was a young waitress who moved with quiet grace, almost like she was invisible to the bustling crowd. Her hair was tied back neatly, her uniform pressed, her shoes tapped lightly against the floor as she went about her work. She had been working here for several years, learning to blend into the background, to serve without being noticed, to smile even when her legs ached from hours of standing. She had grown up in a small town, far from the wealth and luxury she now saw around her. Her family had struggled, and she had learned early how to survive on very little. She remembered long evenings sitting on the edge of her bed, her hands tired from chores, her heart longing for something more. That longing had always been tied to music. From the time she could reach the keys of a small keyboard her parents had bought secondhand, she had poured her feelings into every note she played. Music had been her secret world, a place where she could express herself when words failed. But as life grew harder, she had put her dreams aside to help her family, taking whatever job she could find. Now, the piano in the corner of the restaurant was her reminder of that world. It was a grand piano, polished to perfection, gleaming under the soft lights. Guests rarely noticed it, and most never thought to sit down and play. But she did. Not during the busy hours, of course, when she was rushing to refill glasses and clear tables. She waited until the restaurant was quieter, till the laughter and chatter faded into a gentle hum, until she could slip away without anyone noticing. Then, she would approach the piano and let her fingers dance over the keys, feeling the music flow through her. Each note was a release, a connection to the dream she had tucked away, a small rebellion against the life that demanded so much from her. On this particular evening, the restaurant was crowded and the staff was working hard. The young waitress moved from table to table, refilling water, taking orders, clearing empty plates. She smiled politely at the guests, made small talk when necessary, and made sure each person felt attended to. It was exhausting work, but she had grown used to it. She knew the routines, the rhythms of the busy nights, and the ways to keep herself composed even when she was tired. But her mind often wandered, thinking about the piano, about the music she wanted to play, about the songs she had learned in secret over the years. Sometimes she would hum quietly to herself when she thought no one was listening. Letting the melody fill the space around her, her life was a delicate balance. She had responsibilities that demanded every ounce of her energy, yet she clung to her music like a lifeline. She dreamed of performing on a stage, of feeling the thrill of an audience responding to her music, of being recognized not as a waitress, but as a talented musician. But she also knew that such dreams were distant, almost unreachable. For now, the piano in the corner was enough. Even if only for a few stolen moments each night, the guests came and went, each absorbed in their own world of conversations, meals, and laughter. Some noticed her as she moved gracefully around the room, but most did not. She had become almost invisible, a part of the background, a quiet presence that ensured the restaurant ran smoothly. Yet, she observed everything. She noticed the way certain guests lingered longer at their tables, the way they laughed at jokes that were not funny, the way they ordered the most expensive dishes as if it proved something about their lives. She took mental notes, not out of judgment but out of curiosity. She was fascinated by people, by their habits, by the small quirks that made each person unique. And she carried all of this with her when she finally reached the piano at the end of the night. That night, after the last orders were taken and the restaurant had begun to quiet down, she finally allowed herself a moment of freedom. She approached the grand piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the silence of the empty room settle around her. Then she began to play. The music started softly, hesitant at first, as if testing the waters. But soon, the melody grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers moved with precision and emotion, each note carrying a piece of her story. The music was not just sound. It was feeling, memory, hope, and longing all intertwined. As she played, memories flooded her mind. She remembered sitting by the old keyboard as a child, learning songs from worn-out books, struggling to make the notes sound right. She remembered the long nights when she had practiced in secret, hiding her talent from the world because there was no place for dreams in her family's struggle. She remembered moments of joy, of discovery, of the simple pleasure of making something beautiful with her own hands. And now, as she played on this polished grand piano, all those memories and emotions came alive in the music. She felt free in a way she had not felt in years, as if the weight of her life lifted for just a few minutes. She played until the restaurant was nearly empty, until the last guests had left and the cleaning staff began their rounds. Her fingers were tired, her back ached, but her heart felt lighter. She knew she had to return to reality soon, to the duties of a waitress, to the responsibilities that never ended. But in those stolen moments, she had been more than a waitress. She had been an artist, a dreamer, a person who refused to let life extinguish her passion. As she closed the piano lid and stood up, she allowed herself a small smile. No one had watched her, no one had applauded, but that did not matter. The music had been her reward, her way of connecting with herself and the world beyond the restaurant walls. She gathered her things, prepared for the final tasks of the night, and walked back to the dining area. The room was quiet, empty, and waiting to be cleaned. She moved with purpose, yet there was a subtle lightness in her step, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had nurtured her talent, even in the midst of a life that demanded so much from her. Tonight, as with every night, she carried a secret with her, a secret of skill, of determination, of beauty hidden beneath the surface of a life that seemed ordinary to everyone else, and she knew, deep down, that one day the world would hear her music, and it would be impossible to ignore. For now, she remained in the shadows, content to serve and to dream, but never forgetting the power of the music that lived inside her. The next evening, the restaurant had the same busy energy, the same chatter, the same clinking of cutlery. The young waitress moved quietly between tables, taking orders and refilling drinks, her mind often wandering to the piano in the corner. It had become her refuge, a place where she could escape the long hours and the unending work. She kept her head down, careful to serve each table with patience and grace, as though the very rhythm of the restaurant had become a part of her. That night, a new presence entered the restaurant. A billionaire, known for his sharp tongue and exacting standards, walked in with a few high-profile guests. He was a man whose wealth had made him arrogant, whose success had built walls around him. He carried himself with confidence, almost like a force that demanded attention wherever he went. His eyes scanned the room quickly, evaluating everything from the furniture to the waitstaff. Nothing escaped him. And he seemed to look for flaws, as if it was his right to judge. He noticed the young waitress almost immediately. She moved among the tables with quiet efficiency, her face calm, her gestures polite. Something about her caught his attention, though he would never admit it to anyone. He watched as she approached a table, took an order, and served it without a single mistake. There was a certain poise in her movements, a quiet grace that seemed out of place in a busy restaurant filled with people rushing around. But rather than seeing this as admirable, he assumed it was ordinary, that her polish was merely practice in masking mediocrity. He made a subtle comment to his companions, loud enough for those nearby to hear, mocking her presence. The waitress, busy with her tasks, heard it but chose not to react. She had learned long ago that people like him often thrived on attention and ridicule. She ignored the sneer, keeping her composure and continuing her work. But inside, her heart beat a little faster, a mix of anticipation and unease. She sensed that this man, confident and dismissive, would not leave her unnoticed. As the evening progressed, the billionaire's gaze kept returning to her. He watched her refill a glass, adjust a chair, take an order, and move on without a word. His companions noticed his focus and whispered, curious about what had caught his eye. The billionaire smirked, enjoying the attention, and decided to make a scene. He called for her to come to their table, his voice carrying authority and amusement. The young waitress approached carefully, maintaining her polite demeanor. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, curious whispers floating through the air. She smiled softly, answering their questions and taking orders. all while sensing the underlying challenge in the billionaire's tone. He spoke with a hint of mockery, commenting on her appearance and her movements as though testing her patience. She responded with calm professionalism, knowing that any reaction would only feed his amusement. Then, without warning, he gestured toward the grand piano in the corner. "Do you play?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. The question was not genuine. It was a challenge, an invitation to fail publicly. The room seemed to grow quieter for a moment, the background noise fading as if everyone could sense the tension. The guests held their breath, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. The young waitress hesitated briefly, her fingers instinctively brushing against her apron. She felt a mix of fear and excitement, knowing that this could be a moment that changed everything. She had played the piano countless times in private, letting her music fill empty rooms and quiet nights. But now, under the scrutiny of a man who seemed determined to dismiss her, she felt the weight of expectation. She nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement, and moved toward the piano. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, smirking confidently, already imagining the inevitable awkwardness. His guests, curious and amused, waited for what they assumed would be a brief and unimpressive performance. As she approached the piano, she took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, remembering the countless hours she had spent practicing, the melodies she had learned, the emotions she had poured into every note. She remembered her past struggles, the sacrifices she had made, and the dreams she had quietly nurtured. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a part of her identity, a connection to a world where her voice could be heard even without words. The billionaire watched closely, his eyes narrowing slightly. He leaned forward, anticipating a mistake, a faltering note that would justify his arrogance. The guests held their breath, expecting a minor, polite attempt at playing, something that would be quickly forgotten. The young waitress, however, was about to challenge their assumptions, about to show that talent and passion could not be judged by appearances alone. Her fingers touched the keys, hesitant at first, but quickly finding their confidence. She played a simple note, then another, and the room began to change. The sound was clear, precise, and full of emotion. The music filled the space, drawing attention away from the wealthy guests and the sparkling glasses, pulling the focus to the melody that emerged from her hands. The billionaire's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. He leaned forward, listening more intently, unable to look away. The guests were silent, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the performance. It was not just skill. It was emotion, a story told through sound. Each note carried the weight of her experiences, the hopes she had harbored, and the challenges she had faced. The room, once filled with casual chatter and polite laughter, had become a theater of attention, everyone present drawn into the music. For the young waitress, the moment was surreal. She had imagined many scenarios in her private practice sessions, but none quite like this. She felt the eyes of the room on her, yet she did not falter. The music flowed naturally, guided by years of dedication and passion. It was as though the piano had become an extension of herself, translating her emotions into sound that could be understood without words. The billionaire, who had entered with confidence and superiority, was visibly unsettled. He had expected to witness a minor performance, perhaps even a humorous failure. But what he heard was a display of true talent and depth. His guests exchanged glances, their assumptions challenged, their curiosity transformed into admiration. The power dynamics in the room began to shift subtly. The attention no longer on wealth and status, but on the unexpected source of beauty emerging from the young waitress as she continued to play. The music grew more complex, more expressive. She incorporated subtle variations and flourishes that showcased her technical skill, while also conveying the raw emotion that had been part of her life for so long. The notes were precise, yet alive, each one carrying a sense of purpose and meaning. The billionaire's arrogance began to wane, placed by a grudging respect he could barely acknowledge. By the time she finished, the room was enveloped in silence. The final note lingered in the air, leaving an impression that words could not capture. Guests whispered among themselves, astonished at what they had just witnessed. The billionaire remained seated, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He had entered the restaurant expecting entertainment, perhaps even ridicule, and instead, he had encountered something far more powerful. Raw, undeniable talent, coupled with quiet confidence. The young waitress stood, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, breathing steadily. She had faced the challenge with courage, relying on her experience, her training, and her heart. She returned to her duties with composure, aware that she had just changed something in the perception of those who had doubted her. The billionaire, for his part, had begun to see that wealth and arrogance could not overshadow skill and passion. The evening had shifted, the balance of power subtly but irrevocably altered, all because of a young woman who had dared to play her truth in front of those who had expected her to fail. As the young waitress's fingers touched the keys of the grand piano, the room fell into a hush that seemed almost unnatural. The chatter and clinking of cutlery had vanished, replaced by the anticipation of a performance no one expected to be remarkable. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began with a single note. It was simple, clear, and full of emotion. Then she played another and another, each one flowing naturally into the next. The sound was smooth, precise, yet carried a depth that spoke of countless hours of practice and personal experience. The billionaire, who had leaned back in his chair with a confident smirk, suddenly straightened. He had expected a timid or clumsy attempt, perhaps a few basic notes at best, but what he heard made him shift uneasily. Each chord, each melody, revealed a skill that was both technical and expressive. The music was not just sound, it was storytelling, a language without words that spoke directly to the heart. He tried to mask his surprise, but his eyes betrayed him, widening slightly as he realized he had underestimated her. Guests turned their attention from their conversations to the piano. Some leaned forward, intrigued, their interest piqued by the unexpected performance. Others simply stopped what they were doing, captivated by the sound that seemed to fill the entire space. There was an energy in the room that had not existed before, a shared focus that created a silent bond among everyone present. It was as if the music had pulled them out of the ordinary and into a world where only the notes mattered. The young waitress played with a quiet intensity, her fingers gliding over the keys with confidence and precision. Each movement was deliberate, yet natural, a reflection of years of dedication and passion. She did not play to impress the billionaire, nor to gain the admiration of the guests. She played because the music demanded it, because it was a part of who she was. Every note carried fragments of her life, her struggles, her joys, her longings, and her quiet victories. In that moment, she was not a waitress serving meals. She was an artist, sharing her soul. The billionaire's companions exchanged glances, realizing that this was far from the expected display. They whispered softly, uncertain of what they should say or do. The billionaire himself remained silent, caught between disbelief and admiration. He had built his life on control and judgment, on the ability to assess people quickly and dismiss those he deemed unworthy. But this performance challenged that perception. He could not dismiss what he was hearing. The skill, emotion, and authenticity were undeniable. As the music continued, the young waitress began to explore more complex passages. Her fingers moved with agility and finesse, navigating intricate patterns and sudden shifts in tempo. She introduced subtle variations, embellishments that added depth and richness to the piece. The melody rose and fell, swelling with emotion, dipping into moments of delicate tenderness before surging into powerful crescendos. The audience felt every nuance, their attention riveted by the unexpected beauty. Unfolding before them, the atmosphere in the restaurant had transformed completely. What had been a space defined by wealth, status, and routine service had become a sanctuary of sound. The notes seemed to echo off the walls, weaving around the tables and lingering in the air long after they were played. Guests who had come for a meal found themselves mesmerized by the performance, unable to think of anything else. Some quietly wiped tears from their eyes, touched by the honesty and vulnerability expressed through the music. Others exchanged looks of astonishment, realizing they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. The young waitress herself was completely absorbed in the music. She felt each note as it passed through her fingers, connecting her to memories and emotions that had long been buried. She remembered her childhood when she would play for hours in a small, dimly lit room, practicing songs that seemed too difficult for someone her age. She remembered the sacrifices she had made, putting her dreams aside to support her family, taking on work that left her exhausted but taught her resilience. She remembered the nights when the piano had been her only companion, the only place where she could be fully herself. All of this flowed through her playing, though no one could see it directly. They could only feel it through the music, in the way each note resonated with clarity and emotion. There was a power in the performance that transcended the ordinary, a sense of authenticity that could not be faked or learned. It was a reminder that talent, when combined with dedication and heart, could rise above circumstance and expectation. The billionaire, who had entered the restaurant with an air of superiority, now sat in a rare state of silence. He could not look away, could not ignore the reality of what he was hearing. The performance contradicted every assumption he had made about the young waitress. He had expected mediocrity, perhaps even failure, and instead encountered brilliance. It was humbling, unsettling, and, in a strange way, inspiring. For the first time in a long while, he was reminded that there were things in life beyond money and status, things that could not be bought or controlled. As the piece reached its climax, the music swelled with intensity, each chord resonating with passion and purpose. The young waitress poured every ounce of herself into the performance, letting her emotions guide her hands. The melody soared, then softened, then soared again, taking the listeners on a journey they would not soon forget. Every guest in the room felt the impact, from the quiet diners in the corner to the billionaire and his companions in the center. The piano had become a bridge between her inner world and theirs, a medium through which connection and understanding flowed without words. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, there was a moment of stunned quiet. No one spoke, no one moved. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if unwilling to break the spell that had been cast. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with a few guests, tentative and cautious, then grew as others joined in, swept up by the collective recognition of what they had just witnessed. The sound of clapping filled the space. Mingling with murmurs of admiration and disbelief, the billionaire remained seated, his hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. There was a tension in his posture, a mix of surprise, respect, and an unspoken acknowledgement that he had been wrong to underestimate her. He had been confronted with talent and passion that defied his expectations, and he could not dismiss it. The young waitress, standing with her hands still resting on the piano keys, met his gaze briefly, her eyes calm and confident. There was no arrogance in her look, no demand for recognition. She had shared her gift, and that was enough. The guests continued to whisper among themselves, sharing their impressions, commenting on the unexpected brilliance of the performance. Some spoke of the technical skill, others of the emotional depth, but all were united in their astonishment. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a routine evening in a busy restaurant had transformed into an unforgettable experience, a moment of connection and wonder that transcended social status and expectation. For the young waitress, the performance was both exhausting and exhilarating. She felt the rush of adrenaline, the satisfaction of having shared her passion, and the quiet pride that came from knowing she had risen to the challenge. The piano had been her voice, her medium, her sanctuary, and in that moment, it had spoken not just to her, but to everyone who had heard it. She returned to her duties, moving among the tables with a new sense of confidence, aware that something had changed. The world had glimpsed her talent, and she had held her ground, unshaken and true to herself. The billionaire, meanwhile, sat in thoughtful silence. He had been forced to confront his own assumptions, to recognize that wealth and influence could not measure or control talent. The young waitress had shown him a truth that could not be ignored, that skill, dedication, and passion could emerge from anywhere, regardless of status or circumstance. He had entered the restaurant expecting to assert dominance and perhaps amuse himself at someone else's expense. And instead, he had encountered a force of authenticity and brilliance that demanded respect As the evening continued and the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the impact of the performance lingered. Guests left with the memory of something extraordinary, a story to tell. It's a moment that would remain with them long after the meal was over. The young waitress continued her work, her steps light, her heart full, carrying with her the knowledge that she had shared a piece of herself with the world. And it had been received with wonder, admiration, and deep respect. After the music faded, a hush settled over the restaurant. The sound of the final note seemed to linger in the air, wrapping itself around the tables, chairs, and guests. The applause had begun, first hesitant, then growing as more people joined in. But there was more than just admiration in the room now. There was a shared recognition that what had just been heard was extraordinary. Everyone had expected something ordinary, perhaps even a minor failure, but instead, they had been confronted with skill, emotion, and authenticity beyond their imagination. The young waitress, standing by the piano, felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her fingers still tingled from the performance, her heart raced, and yet there was a calmness in her expression, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had given her all. She had played not for approval, not for recognition, but because the music demanded it, because it was a part of her. And in doing so, she had captured the attention of everyone present, including the billionaire whose arrogance had been so palpable just moments before. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had walked into the restaurant expecting to amuse himself, to assert his superiority, to perhaps scoff at a young waitress whose life he assumed was ordinary. But what he had just witnessed could not be dismissed. Every note, every melody, had revealed depth, talent, and dedication that defied his assumptions. His usual composure wavered as he realized he had misjudged her completely. He had expected mediocrity and instead had encountered brilliance. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Guests speculated about the young waitress's background, curious about how someone in her position could possess such mastery of the piano. Some wondered if she had studied at a prestigious music school, while others guessed that she must have trained under a private tutor. No one knew the truth, and that mystery only added to the fascination. The idea that such talent could exist unnoticed in the midst of ordinary work was both inspiring and humbling. The waitress returned to her duties, moving among the tables with the same calm and grace as before. She took orders, refilled drinks, and cleared plates, all while maintaining an air of quiet dignity. But the room now felt different. The guests looked at her with newfound respect. Even those who had been dismissive before now watched her with curiosity and admiration. There was an understanding, unspoken, yet palpable, that she was not just a waitress, but a person of extraordinary ability who had chosen to live her life quietly. Out of the spotlight, the billionaire, meanwhile, could not shake the impact of the performance. He had encountered countless talented individuals in his life, but few had ever affected him in this way. He realized that his assumptions about people, based on status, appearance, or occupation, were often flawed. He had underestimated her because she had been quiet, because she had moved among the tables with efficiency rather than showmanship, because she had existed in a world far removed from his own. And in that underestimation, he had nearly missed something remarkable. Curiosity began to stir in him. He wanted to know more about her, to understand the story behind the music. He observed her as she moved through the room, noting the subtle confidence in her gestures, the focus in her eyes, the way she seemed completely at ease in her environment despite the extraordinary display she had just given. He realized that there was more to her than just talent. There was resilience, intelligence, and a quiet strength that could not be taught. Gradually, the truth about her background began to emerge. As fragments of conversation reached the attentive ears of some of the guests, they learned that she had grown up in a family that had struggled financially, that she had faced hardship from a young age, and that she had been forced to make sacrifices to help her loved ones. Yet despite these challenges, she had cultivated her talent in secret, dedicating countless hours to practice, learning, and refining her skill. The story that unfolded was one of perseverance, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to her passion. The billionaire listened as pieces of her life were revealed through whispered conversations and subtle observations. He learned that she had once dreamed of pursuing music professionally, of performing on grand stages and sharing her gift with the world. But life had intervened, as it often does, and she had taken on responsibilities that left little room for such ambitions. And yet she had never abandoned her art. She had simply adapted, finding moments in the quiet of the night, the corners of the restaurant where she could express herself freely. He realized that her talent had not been diminished by circumstance. It had been shaped by it. The struggles she had endured had given her music depth, emotion, and authenticity. Every note she had played carried the weight of her experiences. The joys and sorrows she had navigated, and the hope that had sustained her. The realization was profound, and it left the billionaire both humbled and inspired. The room was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a stage for recognition and understanding. Guests who had once focused on luxury and status now paid attention to the human story unfolding before them. The young waitress, moving with quiet purpose, embodied the idea that talent and passion could exist anywhere, regardless of social position or circumstance. Her performance had transcended the ordinary, creating a connection between people from different walks of life, bridging gaps that wealth and status could never touch. As the evening wore on, the young waitress continued her work with the same dedication and grace. She did not seek accolades, did not demand recognition, but her presence and her performance had left a lasting impact. The guests, including the billionaire, were forced to confront their assumptions, to recognize the depth and complexity of human talent, and to appreciate the beauty that could emerge from unexpected places. The billionaire approached her eventually. His demeanor transformed. There was no longer arrogance in his posture, no hint of mockery in his expression. Instead, there was a measured respect, an acknowledgement of the extraordinary skill and dedication she had displayed. He asked about her background, her training, and her experiences, genuinely interested in understanding the story behind the music. She responded with honesty, sharing parts of her journey, the sacrifices she had made, and the passion that had driven her through years of quiet practice. The conversation between them was not about power or status. It was about recognition, understanding, and the shared appreciation of talent. The billionaire, who had once assumed superiority based on wealth and position, now realized that true greatness could not be measured by such metrics. He had been humbled by a young woman whose life had been shaped by challenges, yet whose spirit and skill had remained undiminished by the end of the evening. The truth about the young waitress was clear to all who had witnessed the performance and the reactions it had provoked. She was not merely a waitress. She was an artist, a person of remarkable talent, and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Her story had inspired admiration, respect, and reflection, reminding everyone present that extraordinary ability could exist in places often overlooked, and that the value of a person could never be judged solely by their occupation or social standing. The billionaire left the restaurant that night with a new perspective. He had encountered someone who had challenged his assumptions, humbled his pride, and offered a glimpse into a world of talent, dedication, and authenticity that could not be bought or commanded. He had been reminded that true greatness often resides in quiet, unnoticed corners, and that recognition comes not from wealth or influence, but from the courage to pursue one's passion with honesty and heart. For the young waitress, the evening had been transformative as well. She had faced the scrutiny of the world, the judgment of those accustomed to power, and had emerged not only unshaken but strengthened. Her music had spoken for her, conveying her story, her emotions, and her unyielding dedication. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone present that talent, perseverance, and authenticity are qualities that can never be underestimated. No matter how quietly they exist, the restaurant had quieted down after the evening's extraordinary events. Guests lingered at their tables, speaking in low voices about the unexpected performance they had just witnessed. The young waitress moved gracefully among them, clearing plates and refilling glasses, her movements calm and deliberate. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that had grown over the years. A confidence that came not from recognition or praise, but from the knowledge of her own ability and the depth of her dedication. The billionaire sat at the table where he had been observing her, reflecting on what had just happened. He had arrived with a sense of entitlement, expecting to dominate and perhaps amuse himself at someone else's expense. Instead, he had been confronted with something he could neither ignore nor dismiss. Her music had revealed talent, emotion, and resilience in a way that demanded respect. For the first time in a long while, he felt a mixture of humility and admiration, a recognition that greatness could exist outside the circles of wealth and power he had always valued. Curiosity and admiration mingled in his thoughts. He found himself wanting to know more, not just about the music she played, but about the person she was. He watched as she moved through the restaurant, noticing the subtle way she interacted with guests, the care she took in her work, and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. Each gesture, each action, reinforced the impression that she was extraordinary, not only because of her talent, but because of her character at last. He called her over, speaking in a tone that was unusually measured for him. He asked her about her background, her experience with music, and the journey that had brought her to this point. She responded with honesty, sharing pieces of her story. The long hours of practice in secret, the sacrifices made for family, the quiet determination that had kept her pursuing her passion even when life seemed to offer few opportunities. She spoke without pride or complaint, simply recounting the truth of her journey. As she spoke, the billionaire listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that her story was not just one of talent, but of resilience, of courage, and of a refusal to let circumstance define her worth. He thought about his own life, the privileges and advantages he had taken for granted, and he felt a sense of awe and respect for someone who had achieved so much under entirely different conditions. It was a moment of reflection, one that challenged his assumptions and reshaped his perspective. After listening, he made an offer. It was not a demand, nor was it a command. He offered support, guidance, and the opportunity to explore her musical talent in ways that had been previously out of reach. But what was most remarkable was her response. She listened carefully, considered the proposal, and then made a choice that reflected her own priorities and values. She accepted the offer, but on her own terms, asserting her independence and maintaining the dignity that had carried her through years of challenge. The interaction between them was a turning point. It was a meeting of minds and hearts, one that transcended wealth, status, and social expectation. The billionaire had learned that influence and power were limited in their ability to recognize true talent, and the young waitress had shown that confidence, skill, and perseverance could command respect without relying on external validation. Their encounter became a lesson in humility, courage, and the enduring power of passion. Word of the evening spread quickly among the guests and staff. Many spoke of the remarkable performance, of the unexpected brilliance of someone they had overlooked simply because of her role as a waitress. The young woman became a symbol of perseverance and the hidden potential that can exist in anyone, regardless of position or circumstance. Her story inspired admiration and reflection, encouraging those who heard it to reconsider the way they judged others and the value they placed on different forms of talent and dedication. For the young waitress, the events of that evening were transformative. She had faced scrutiny, expectation, and the challenge of performing in front of someone who had underestimated her. She had risen to the occasion, demonstrating not only technical skill, but also emotional depth and personal integrity. Her music had spoken for her, conveying her story and leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. She returned to her work with a sense of accomplishment and quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had shared a part of herself that could not be measured by wealth, status, or opinion. The billionaire, for his part, left the restaurant with a new perspective. He had encountered someone who had humbled him, inspired him, and challenged his understanding of talent and success. He realized that recognition and respect were not earned through money or influence alone, but through the courage to pursue one's passion, the dedication to develop one's skills, and the authenticity to remain true to oneself. The experience left him reflective, aware that true greatness often exists in unexpected places, and that it is impossible to judge a person's worth by superficial measures. In the weeks that followed, the young waitress continued her work at the restaurant, but the impact of the evening remained. Guests remembered the performance, spoke of it to friends, and shared the story of the young woman whose talent had astonished them. She continued to play the piano in her quiet moments, practicing and refining her skill, but now with a renewed sense of possibility. The world had glimpsed her ability, and she carried that knowledge with grace and confidence. Her journey was a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of pursuing one's passion, and the ability of talent and dedication to transcend circumstance. She had proven that extraordinary skill could emerge from ordinary environments. That true recognition comes from authenticity and hard work, and that one's worth is not defined by social status or external validation. By the end of that chapter of her life, she had not only shared her music but had inspired others to see beyond appearances, to recognize potential in unexpected places, and to value courage, integrity, and dedication. The billionaire's lesson was equally profound. Influence and wealth are limited in their ability to assess talent, and true greatness often resides in quiet, overlooked corners of the world. The evening had changed both their perspectives, leaving a lasting impact that neither would forget in the quiet aftermath. As the lights dimmed and the restaurant prepared for another day, the young waitress paused at the piano one last time. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingers. The connection between herself and the music? She played softly, not for recognition, not for applause, but for the joy of creation, the fulfillment of a lifelong passion. The notes floated gently through the empty room, a reminder that talent, perseverance, and heart could shine brightly, even in the most unexpected of places.